Welcome back to the In Chamber. I'm your host, Tom Schuman. Our focus today is the relationship between Indiana and Canada. It's one we've explored in depth over the years in our BizVoice magazine, with often the focus being on trade, which totaled more than $21.3 billion in 2018. Indiana is one of 4 states under the auspices of Canada's Consul General to Detroit. The other states, not surprisingly, are Michigan, Ohio, and Kentucky. The various Consul General offices in Canada serve a variety of roles, with a large focus on trade and investment between Canada and the United States. The person currently serving in that role began his career as a civil litigation lawyer in Ontario. He entered Canadian federal politics in 2000, serving as a member of Parliament for 15 years. Upon leaving elected office, he became a distinguished political scientist in residence at the University of Windsor. Joe Comartin, welcome to the In Chamber.
Well, Tom, thanks very much for having me. I really do appreciate this opportunity.
As I mentioned some of your career highlights, but you were appointed to your current position in late 2018. Talk about the experiences you've had thus far in that role.
Well, it's been a dual one, what I call the pre-pandemic period and then the post-pandemic or the current pandemic period. Tom, when I took the appointment, it was in part because I really enjoy interacting with people. My whole career, whether as a lawyer, as a politician, or a professor at the university, always been motivated and inspired by interaction with people, and it certainly has made my life more interesting as a result, I think, of that approach. The job itself is certainly challenging. We have issues that are confronting both of our countries that need attention drawn to them, and hopefully resolutions found. So I've been able to work right at the front lines of current top issues. It's been very rewarding in that regard. Met a lot of interesting people, and I'm looking forward to being able to continue to do that post-pandemic, because a lot of that got shut down with us having to work remotely. The consulate's been basically shuttered during this period of time since mid-March. Working remotely, we are fairly comfortable that we've been able to meet all of the needs that our consulate normally is required to perform, and have been able to do that, we think, successfully. But we certainly are looking to reopen and hopefully be able to be engaging people on a more direct and personal basis. We will reopen the consulate on a gradual basis over the next number of months, and hopefully by the new year we'll be in a position to be back to what will be the new normal, but one that will allow for that interaction, more direct and intimate action.
So working remotely has, I guess, deprived you of a kind of a special view from the Renaissance Center there in downtown Detroit. Talk about that a little bit.
Well, it's kind of interesting. I live in my home in Windsor. It's more convenient actually traveling from here over to the Renaissance Center because of the where I live in Detroit would probably have been further out. I get to the office in 8 to 10 minutes, even though I have to go across the border through the tunnel, which comes out right at the base of the Renaissance Center. But I'm up on the 11th floor in the Ren Center, and I actually can look out at and see my neighborhood across the river, because my house is only about a block and a half from the river. So the other thing, it's just great, especially on sunny days, the traffic that's moving down the river, the commercial traffic, both ocean liners and ocean ships, and Great Lakes shipping that moves down that very busy waterway. It's interesting during the warm months when the sailboats are moving down as well. They provide a pretty sight. So yeah, it's a great view.
Well, we know so much about the waterway there, the Ambassador Bridge, so crucial as the link between our two countries. How has that been impacted by COVID, and are things getting back to normal in that sense?
I think they're moving fairly well to normal with the subject to the restrictions that are on. In April, May, the two countries got together and reached an agreement at what the limitations would be at the border in terms of crossing. The essential rule is that if it's an essential service that the person is needing to cross for, and that mainly is employment, that's permissible. What is not permissible is crossings for recreational or tourism purposes, or for just making contacts with family, as well as shopping. That's been a pretty common, depending on where the fluctuation in the dollar is. We've had people moving in both directions depending on what advantage that gives them. But that is no longer allowed for. That agreement was done on a 30-day basis, so every 30 days it's been renewed. Canada made some modifications to it, really to deal with humanitarian concerns. People, for instance, wanting to get married, one living on either side of the border, couldn't get across, or would, if they could get across, would be required to quarantine and couldn't do that for employment purposes. So we've loosened that a little bit and allowed for exemptions in that regard. I don't think it's gone quite as far as we'd like it to, and I know the ministers in Ottawa, our government ministers in Ottawa, are taking another look at this. I think we may see a little bit more flexibility, but I think the basic rule, if you are involved in an essential service, you can go back and forth. If you are doing it for wanting to cross for recreational or personal purposes or shopping, that is not allowed. And I think essentially that will continue. It was just renewed again, so it'll come up for further renewal on October the 21st. I think the general consensus is it'll probably be renewed another year or two, but yeah, hopefully not a year or two, another month or two. But maybe with some modifications along the humanitarian lines.
I know one of your predecessors we had a chance to talk with in the past, Roy Norton, emphasized so much the infrastructure behind the transportation between the two countries. Am I correct? Is there a new bridge under construction or currently in the planning stages?
Very much so. It's actually, we just got in a note last week or 10 days ago that you actually can see the two frames, tower frames, pedestals coming out of the ground now. Yeah, and in spite of the pandemic, there was very, very little slowdown. Obviously, we had to provide personal protection equipment for some of the workers. We had to work in some provisions for social distancing and that kind of thing, but they adapted very quickly to it. It is scheduled to be finished by the end of 24. And as of right now, they still see us being on schedule. Again, with not being entirely sure what further negative impact the COVID might have, the pandemic might have, but they're still fairly confident they've dealt with it well up to this point and feel that they'll be able to continue to do so. So it's online. You mentioned Roy Norton. I would say if anybody can take credit for that finally getting through and us putting it under construction, he's one of the ones he was a big advocate for here. He was one of my predecessors, and while he was here, he did a great deal of work in moving that project along. So yeah, it's coming along fine as far as we can see. We're on schedule and fully expect that it'll do it. I don't know if you want me to get into what some of the things that it's going to do. It's going to be much more efficient than the existing crossing that we've got, which is quite aged at this point. And one of the key things, I think, in terms of efficiencies, back to the importance of the supply chain in the manufacturing sector, is that we, for the first time, will now have direct connection from the Trans-Canada Highway on the Canadian side into the I-95 on the U.S. side. So there will be no more of this, having to go through city streets to move back and forth. It'll dramatically increase the ability to move product efficiently. We're also looking at a number of new technologies that should speed up the screening process. So again, we expect that there's a pilot going on the Canadian side right now that has the effect of moving when a truck actually gets up to the border crossing. Right now, it takes roughly 6 minutes for that truck to get through. Now, there's other waits before that, but we've got that down on the Canadian side because of this new technology down to between a half a minute and a minute. So there's, that's a big savings when you think of the amount of trucks that
I
we
was
move.
gonna say time is money, right? When it comes to that.
Yeah, and I mean the supply chains are so crucial to the manufacturing sector. I mean, you always hear those stories about, for an most automobiles, when they're built, parts of them have crossed that border 5, 6, 7 times in each vehicle. So it's really important that those efficiencies are at the maximum.
Let's talk about some of the other issues that are so important between our two countries and between Indiana and Canada. NAFTA certainly being one and its successor, but with your work in the private sector as a member of parliament, talk a little bit about some of the experiences with NAFTA at the time.
Well, overall, it was positive when we brought it into effect. There was certainly a lot of opposition to it for concerns, some of which turned out to not be valid, others that in fact did surface and continued to be, some of which fortunately we've addressed in the USMCA, in the new one. But yeah, I think the major concern we had with it, and I'm on the negative side, I'll come back to the positive in a minute, was the impact it had on employment in both Canada and the United States, quite frankly. The manufacturing jobs the losses were significant. I think that's well documented on both sides of the border, with Mexico being the primary beneficiary of that. Asia and Europe, some benefit, but the primary beneficiary of that agreement was a good deal of automobile manufacturing moved into Mexico, both parts and assembly plants. So that was an ongoing concern. The positive side was that in spite of those job losses, because of the expansion of the supply chain, there was some significant offsetting of new jobs being created against those that were lost. So that was very positive. I think overall, because it opened up the market much, tariff-free to both sides of the border, there were all sorts of sectors that really did benefit from the agreement and continue to the present time. So I think that was our experience with it. We had been talking for some time on the Canadian side about some of the things that needed to be changed, which did get addressed, both around the cost of labor and environmental standards and safety standards. So those have been addressed to some degree in the new agreement.
I say we're very early in the new agreement as at the time of this conversation, in effect for less than 3 months. But what do you see some of those changes, some of those improvements that will play out with the USMCA?
Well, there's no question with the rules of origin that the steel industry in particular in both Canada and the United States will, and I guess to some degree in Mexico, will benefit significantly. That now moving to where 75% basically, that's a rough rule. There's some varieties here. This is a complex agreement, as you can imagine, given the significance and the size of the economies that we're talking about. But the general rule of 75% steel in the vehicles will dramatically improve the steel industry in all 3 countries. So that's a big positive plus for it. The negative side of that is that we have to track this, and that we know we're getting feedback from the industry, both the part suppliers as well as the assemblers, of how do we track whether that piece of steel that's in this part was originally from ore here in North America. So that's one of the problems that's surfacing. One of the good things about the agreement is that it set up several ongoing negotiating tables, if I can put it that way, to deal with any conflicts that we run into in interpretation of what the agreement is. And so we're at the table already on a number of those. The labor standards are a problem for Mexico, because they have to bring their workers up to $16 an hour, and that's a major shift. They have to provide a better labor management structure, which they do not have at the present time. They passed legislation. They're in the process of, in effect, strengthening the union side of the equation. But that's going to take some time, but it is working up to this point. So those are the kind of things that are happening. I think what we're going to see, Tom, is over the next, well, minimum 2 to 4 years, we'll continue to, have sessions at these tables to work out the problems. But all three of the countries have come to the table, in good faith. They're looking at where the problems are, what they're hearing from the private sector, trying to address them as expeditiously as possible.
That's really interesting. Some people listening probably think that all the negotiations, the discussions, coming to the table leads up to the agreement. But as you pointed out, it's really an ongoing kind of an evolutionary process going forward.
Well, and the agreement is such that it's only for 6 years. At the end of 6 years, there has to be a review done at that point. It's mandated that a review be done. So the importance of those ongoing negotiations at these tables are really crucial, so that when we get to that 6-year mark, if in fact we need not just interpretation of the agreement, but actual changes to the agreement, we'll know what those changes are and hopefully have a resolution to the problems, being able to prepare them, present them at that point, and get those changes ratified.
Yeah, sounds like that will make it much more of a continuous type process. That's so critical. Joe, you've referenced supply chain several times. Automobile parts obviously so critical in the relationship between Indiana and Canada, and probably all 4 states in which you work. Talk about some of the keys, how big that relationship is, and some of the keys for continued success in that area.
Oh, geez, Tom, I should have prepared some numbers for you. I mean, I guess the one that I always use is that all 4 of those states, we're their primary trading partner. Canada's their primary trading partner. And in most cases, in those 4 states, we provide a trading relationship that is 2, 3, and 4 times greater than any of their other trading partners. And oftentimes we'll see stats where, with Indiana, you would have to have 4 or 5 of your other trading partners to match what you're trading with Canada. The other thing I always throw in here, because you guys are winning on this one, is the trade balance is very much in your favor in those 4 states in particular. Less so in other states where I suppose our energy coming into the United States offsets some of that, but you have a favorable trading balance in that regard. I think the other point that I want to make in terms of the supply chain, though, it's not just the trade that occurs between our countries, but we have so many partnerships that have been established in the private sector where we're manufacturing goods or producing goods on both sides of the border and moving those back. The same company is partnered up with another company or may own the other company in the other country. There's a great deal of that. So we not only trade with each other, we actually manufacture with each other. The other figure that I like throwing out is that in terms of the companies that are in the United States, Canadian companies that are in the United States, and the trade that we do as a result of that, it creates about 900,000 jobs in the United States, direct jobs. And then, of course, you get all the offshoot from those as well, but direct jobs is 900,000 created. So that's the kind of relationship. It is hard and impossible to look any place else in the world where we've had a relationship that has been as long as it has, preceded the trade agreements even, and has been so beneficial to both countries, and Mexico now is part of that group. We can point, whether it's the European Union, some of the Asian relationships, some of the relationships that have been established in South America, they're just not as good as the one that we have between our 3 countries.
And we mentioned automobile parts is certainly one sector. Agriculture is another that's vitally important. Talk about that relationship, and are there some things in the new trade agreement that help with the agricultural relationship between the 2 countries?
Yeah, I think there are 2 areas that the U.S. was pushing really hard on in the negotiations. One was with poultry, but I think the bigger one was with dairy. And so Canada made some concessions, which we'd already made, by the way, with the agreement we had with the European Union, with CETA, that opened up our dairy market somewhat more to the Europeans. We've now done the same with the United States. it will allow for product from the U.S. being able to move into Canada. We did withstand the push by the U.S. To change our supply management arrangement. We basically have quotas that are established for people who produce dairy products, and those are pretty rigidly enforced. We still have those, but we have been able to work out by those negotiations, opening up our market that seemed to be satisfactory to the U.S., at least at this round. There's been some opposition, I can tell you, in Canada to us doing that. We've been very protective of our dairy sector, and because it's an efficient one. We think we do better than you guys do on your side of the border in this regard. But by the same token, it was important because the products that are coming in, both from the U.S. and from Europe, now will give a greater variety to consumers to be able to purchase.
Well, let's talk about another area where there's certainly been disagreements, but fortunately now, and at least a agreement going forward in the area of tariffs. 2018, we had both steel and aluminum tariffs. The United States and Mexico and Canada, those were rescinded as part of the USMCA. Then we had a period, implementation of a 10% tariff on aluminum was reimposed, which is now going to end. First question, talk about those tariffs originally, some of the impacts that are seen, and then second, what's your reaction to the latest news, the end of those aluminum tariffs for hopefully going forward?
Yeah, I think it's important to understand the context in which the tariff agreement was reached, that is the lifting of the tariffs. Canada had pushed really hard, large campaigns. We did a lot of outreach to both the political community on the U.S. side and the business community. Got a lot of support that they should be ended. Quite frankly, I think the objective analysis was they ended only because it was the only way we could get the breakthrough to get the agreement, the overall agreement, resolved. You have to appreciate, Tom, that agreement that was reached, which was a couple of months before we got the final on the USMCA, had an understanding in it that the tariffs could be reimposed if there was a surge. That was the term that was used by any one of the countries. Any one of the three countries could impose tariffs if there was a surge of products in steel and aluminum into one of the other countries. Mr. Lighthizer latched onto that, argued that there was in fact a surge. All the evidence to the contrary, both from the industry and from government sources.
I was going to say, was there a clear definition of what constitutes a surge?
No, they couldn't come to an agreement on it, and so they left it open in that regard. So it wasn't a percentage or anything like that. And in part because it's really difficult to do anything like that because it in effect prevents growth. If you say, well, this is the maximum amount you're going to be able to import into one of the other countries, that means that's your target. Once you get to that, you can't do anything in terms of continuing to grow, even though you may be able to produce more efficiently, more effectively, all the rest, and where there's a demand in the other country for it. So we and Mexico both resisted that very strongly. So we left it sort of up in the air by using that terminology. So it was used. The industry responded very negatively to the tariffs that were imposed the first week of August. But quite frankly, bipartisan support came to Canada and Mexico in this regard. Well, to Canada from both Republicans and Democrats. But the industry was overwhelmingly opposed to them. And finally, they were happily taken down in the middle part of September, but left open for the U.S. side to be monitoring these, and with the possibility they may be reinstated at some point in the future. Again, we were very happy to see this happen because we were just on in fact, that day when the U.S. announced they were withdrawing them, the tariffs, we were about to announce our counter-retailer tariffs to them, which would have had, again, a negative impact on industry on both sides of the border because of the supply chains being so interwoven. So we were very happy to see that go. Our industry on our side of the border was happy for both reasons. Both wouldn't have to pay the U.S. ones, and their counterparts on the U.S. side wouldn't have to pay the Canadian ones. So we're quite happy with that. Hopefully it will remain this way. But certainly the administration seems to indicate that there's a real possibility that they could come back at some point. And we're cautioning people that as happy as we are with what's happened, we have to be vigilant to make sure that they don't come back.
So still a little bit of uneasiness there. Would that be an apt description?
There's a degree of uneasiness. Actually, it permeates in the business community into a real unease around and an uncertainty of what they're doing in terms of their planning, their developing of their products. Again, looking to growth in that regard. So there's that level of uncertainty is still there. Nowhere near where it was when the tariffs were actually on, but it is still there because of the possibility they might come back.
Well, as a chamber of commerce, we often use that. One of the biggest detriments for business in general is uncertainty, and we're operating in a world of uncertainty right now. So anything that can be done to reduce that in areas is certainly beneficial to the business community.
Well, Tom, in particular, given what I mean, there's this perspective from Canada. Again, we're offended by the fact that 232 tariffs are used at all against Canada. But in effect, the U.S. is saying that Canada is a security risk to them. When you look at the aluminum in particular, we've been providing aluminum to the United States military, both in the First World War and the Second World War. We were the major provider of aluminum in both those wars. And the people we're competing against are China and Russia. You can't help but think if we got into another military challenge by either one of those governments, you can be sure that supply would dry up really quickly. Whereas with Canada, you've got a secure source, one that we're an ally. We would be there providing on an ongoing basis. So yeah, the Canadian people, there's a general sense of being offended by by the use of those tariffs, both on steel and on aluminum. But within the business community, that uncertainty, I did a number of calls over the last month and a half, from the time they were imposed, even prior to them being imposed, because we were getting rumors that they were coming. And that image of uncertainty sticks with me. Almost everybody I spoke to, whether it was a chamber, other business associations, or individual companies, it always came up. How do you expect us to do business when we don't know for sure what our prices are going to be, and abruptly are we going to be faced with a 10%, 25% increase in our costs?
Joe, one example of Canadian investment in Indiana in the form of a business is Doral Juvenile. Has a major production facility in Columbus, Indiana, produces car seats, other infant safety products. I know they had a tremendous expansion there in recent years. Is that something your office becomes involved in when there's opportunities like that between Canadian companies and with Indiana operations?
We did not have the direct input or contact with that particular company, but in terms of other experiences we've had, not just obviously in Indiana, but in all the states, that is one that we would oftentimes be directly involved with, sometimes putting partners together, drawing to Canadian investors opportunities that we had identified if we heard from companies on the Canadian side. And vice versa, if it was U.S. companies looking to invest in Canada, we would act as a go-between in terms of providing opportunities on the Canadian side of the border for that.
Joe, tell our listeners a little bit about Windsor. You not only live there now, I understand you're a native of Windsor. I assume you've probably lived there throughout many parts of your career. For those on the U.S. side who know Windsor as that place across the river from Detroit, do a little sales pitch. Tell us what's great about Windsor.
Well, let's see. We've got a distillery. We're making and still are, even though it's not, this distillery doesn't own the name anymore, but the Canadian Club whiskey it's right there on the border. I can see that from my office in the Renaissance Center. I think the other two things that we always mention in terms of attracting visitors is we have a very large casino that's operated, actually owned by the Ontario government, but operated by one of the operators by Caesars out of Nevada. And the other thing that not many people know either is that in the county we've developed a really strong wine industry. We're up to, I think, about 20 wineries in the county immediately around Windsor. Produce some really good wine, I can tell you, from having drunk a fair amount of it. So from a tourism standpoint, we're constantly pushing that. One of the problems we've got, of course, as I said earlier, with the border restrictions we've got on, is that certainly has been curtailed right now. The city itself is, of course, historically known as the auto center for Canada. We at one time had all three of the Detroit three with assembly plants here. We still have both Fords and Fiat, Chrysler here producing the minivan, which is still a major seller, and that plant is the major employer in the city of Windsor. And our part suppliers have been doing very well. That supply chain has worked very well for them. Again, if you put them all together, their employment level would be equal to, and perhaps now a little bit higher than that Chrysler plant. So the auto industry is certainly still the base for our economic well-being in this community. We have an extremely well-skilled workforce. The tool and die area, the new technologies that are being used for design and purposes like that, our plastic industry and mold manufacturers are as good as any in the world, and have, I think, as a result of that, have been able to be very much a key player in that supply chain, the auto supply chain.
Well, Joe, it wouldn't surprise people who know me, my coworkers, or others that I've been to the casino in Windsor, and also actually enjoyed a lovely bicycle ride through the city at one point a few years ago on a trip. We've talked about a lot of the past issues and some of the current things with tariffs. As you look ahead and look forward, what do you see as some of the keys in your role with your office and in that relationship between Canada and the United States and even Indiana?
Well, I think the key one, Tom, if it's going to continue to be the success it has been up to this point, is that we have to be thinking of the relationship of one as partners as opposed to as competitors. The agreement, really, the spirit of the agreement, of the trade agreement, is that this is a partnership between three countries, that we all benefit from that because we've created a bigger market. We have the free flow of goods. We've protected and recognize that in all three countries, we've protected certain key areas, but it's not protectionism in the sense of just excluding everybody else. So the key is that is a partnership, a sincere, good faith partnership between the three countries. If we can continue with that, I guess, philosophical underpinning, the future is very bright for the continent. It lets us compete with Asia and Europe. It lets us on a peer basis, if not perhaps on a bit of a superior basis, because of how well it works here. And so if we're going to be successful, if we're going to provide good jobs, good employment, wealth to our populace as a whole, that's key to being able to do that. I think the sort of surge of protectionism that is around the globe, not just in North America, is really a danger to that ongoing partnership.
Joe, final question for you. Throughout this season 4 of the In Chamber, we're asking everyone a pretty simple, pretty straightforward question, but What makes a great day for you? What do you think about work? You think about away from work, personal life, hobbies, family, different things. What makes a great day for Joe Comartin?
Well, I think without a doubt, I've got 7 grandchildren. Unfortunately, none of whom live in the Windsor area. The closest ones are about 150 miles away, and I guess getting to spend time with them, that's a great day for both my wife and myself. We tease our children a little bit that we love our grandchildren more than we ever love them because they're there and they're little and they're so enjoyable. So yeah, a great day is being able to spend time with the grandkids.
You need to get some of them to move a little bit closer back to Windsor, though.
I've tried, Tom. I've tried. Yeah, no, they've all got their own careers, and those drew them outside the city in order to pursue those careers. So, but we miss the grandkids for sure.
Yeah, Joe. Any final comments? Anything else you'd like to share with our audience today?
Tom, my father was an American. He was born in North Dakota. Good deal of his life, he wandered, during the Depression, and eventually he came back, got a job at the Ford Motor Company in Detroit, where he met my mother, and who's Canadian. And I think my family history is one of just how intimate the relationship is between our two countries, and one that it has no comparison. I've looked around the globe. As a member of Parliament, I traveled a good deal around the globe, and there was no place I identified that was anywhere near close to the relationship between our two countries. And it's one that I think should inspire us all to take into account, as we make our policy decisions in whatever field we're working in, that we recognize the importance of that, the absolute importance of that relationship, one that needs to be, like any relationship, you let it slide, it's going to deteriorate. So we have to be working on it on an ongoing basis, and it's one that we're a model for the rest of the globe. That they can mimic what we're doing would be great. I think it would move a lot of ways to eliminating friction in all sorts of places around the globe if people approach their issues the same way Canada and the United States have. So it's one that I leave with people as often as I can. Important relationship. It's not perfect, needs to be worked on, but it's one that is very inspiring, not only to our generation but to subsequent generations. We have a responsibility to carry through on that.
Well, Joe, an excellent analogy, and certainly a reminder to everyone to not take anything for granted. Congratulations, on all the great work that you've done and for your service in this important role as the Consul General to Detroit. Thanks for joining us and sharing your thoughts with our listeners.
Well, Tom, thanks again for having me, and I really do appreciate it.
All right. Well, again, we hope you've enjoyed our conversation. We're sure you have with Joe Comartin, Consul General to Detroit, in a very important role in the ongoing and critical relationship between Indiana and Canada. Thank you for listening to this episode of the In Chamber. Before we go, a quick reminder, our 31st annual awards event, scheduled for November 10th, will take place that day, but as have so many other activities been converted to a virtual format. So we'll be honoring our award winners and have a special programming at noon, from noon to 1:30 that day on Tuesday, November 10th. Full details online at indianachamber.com. We'll be back with our next conversation in 2 weeks. Thanks as always for listening to the In Chamber.